Hello, everybody. It's great to see you. People are climbing into the Zoom room as we speak, so let's give it 30 seconds. I've learned that sometimes it takes a little bit of time.
You're determined to master this technology, aren't you?
I have learned, Ed, how to do this. So everyone should be muted. Debra is behind the TBE logo, so I thank you for your help. If you see people who are not muted, if you can mute them for me. As many of you know, I am still compiling my book, Embarrassing Things Recited on Zoom.
Oh my goodness.
Oh
I
yeah.
don't want to contribute to that one.
I have quite a collection and I don't want you to be part of it. So watch out what you say. I have some good ones. All right, we're almost there. So while we're waiting for people in the room, it's great to see everyone. This summer, many of you were with me for American Judaism on Film, where I'm going to maintain a lot of the structure of those classes, where introductory welcome, and then we'll do some breakout groups to make sure, even despite the large class, will probably be over 100 people, everyone gets a chance to share. And then I'm going to provide some context, some history. As many of you know, American Jewish history is my forte and was my passion prior to entering the congregational rabbinate. And then we'll end with kind of where do we go from here. Raise your hand now if you actually got to see the film. Great. That never stopped anyone from fully contributing to a discussion group. So if you didn't see the film, that's absolutely fine. I do hope you check out the movies for the Boston Jewish Film Festival. It's a really incredible resource in the Boston community, and it's never been easier to see the films. The challenge for me with this film was I had to watch it and remember it, because after 2 days, you can't return to it. So when you sign on and start the movie, you have 2 days to finish it. Next week's film, and I'll remind everyone at the end of class, I think I'm going to change. I couldn't watch the movies before selecting the movies for us. So it was a mere guess. And the short films are not as impressive as I had hoped. You can disagree with me offline, passionately disagree with me if you fell in love with the short films. I will not judge you. But I think I'm going to email everyone with another film for next week. And then the third week of our classes after the film festival. Oh boy, we have the chat on to everyone. That could be a dangerous thing, but Susan Posner says, I watched them and she agrees they weren't that good. Thank you. So the third week of the film class is after the film festival. So I have some short films that I have watched that are free and available on the internet, and we'll discuss those. They're Israeli short films, which was going to be our topic for this class. And then I realized it overlapped with the Boston Jewish Film Festival, which is a favorite of mine. And I thought, hey, this year we can all see the films very easily from home and discuss them together. So before we begin, one final plug for the film festival. Check it out, see lots of films. And this week you will hear which one we'll be discussing. Maybe you just want to see them all and be surprised. Oh, Judy wants to comment. Judy, you're on.
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
I just want to say that next Saturday night, the 14th, that there is a continuing conversation about this film, and there's going to be a panel, and our own Ed Gaskin is going to be part of that panel as well as, is her name Susanna Herschel? Is that what?
Susanna Herschel, yes, his daughter, who's in the movie quite a bit.
And she's going to be part of the panel as well.
Great. Yes.
Once you purchase the film, then you're entitled to the live conversation.
Thank you. Yes, so she's a Newton resident, Susanna Heschel. So a little local touch. And Ed is with us tonight. So I thank you, Ed, for being with us this evening to share a little. But let's jump right in. So it's good to see everyone. We have a full house. I hope you like the film. I am calling it a film about the golden age of Black-Jewish relations. What I have to share tonight is not as hopeful as what we witnessed on the film. The history of Black-Jewish relations, it was not always the golden age, which presents us with a challenge today. What is demanded to recreate that golden age that we saw on film between Abraham Joshua Heschel and Dr. Martin Luther King? But let's do this. I would love everyone to at least get to share a little bit. What we're going to do as we do each class is begin in breakout rooms. The general rule is if you are multitasking to the degree that you can't fully participate, don't accept entry into a breakout room so that everyone has full participation. We're going to go in groups of 5 for 5 minutes, which means if 5 people show up in your Zoom room, just take a minute each, don't go over. And I'd love you just to introduce yourself, say your name, perhaps where you're sitting at this time, even if you're far away physically, and then share something you learned about the film. I'm less interested in being Siskel and Ebert and giving it thumbs up or thumbs down or an 8 or 10 or 6, but more about what you learned in watching the film. So with Debra's help, we're going to just break for 5 quick minutes. Hopefully you'll see 4 other people in the room and you'll get a 30-second warning to come back to the big room. Debra, can we do that? I hope, Debra?
Yes, sorry, we're all set.
Hey, all right. I'll
Okay.
see you in 5 minutes, everyone.
5 minutes, here we go.
So I hope everyone was
Yes.
able to share something that they've learned. I just want to take a movie that I think, someone in my group said it made them proud to be a Jew, and suggest that what we're glimpsing is the golden age of Black-Jewish relations. And we are in a moment today that we might not necessarily describe as so. And yet, perhaps it's our moment to rise to the occasion, as the Jewish community did in that moment in time, that we live in a unique moment in history. And I want to just have that question underneath our conversation, that this is not meant to just be a historic perspective, but it's really to learn from history, to ask the question, what provides a golden age and what creates 2 communities to come apart so that this many years later, we look back at it differently. I am colored by a teacher that I had the opportunity to learn from, Cornell West, who is now at Harvard, who once said, the Jews have a tendency to romanticize this relationship. Now that the Jews have made it, it makes them feel better. Now that's Cornell West, who is controversial to say the least, and likes to throw out some difficult lines to hear. But I want to offer that as a place to begin, to really begin to challenge us, to look hard at our relationship. If we look at history, the Black and Jewish community have always lived close together. And when you live close together, sometimes like in a family, you rub up against each other. And while there are moments where one romanticizes the relationship, if you're really honest, you'll see moments where you're driving each other crazy as well. And I'd like to say in a family, it's lovingly. And in this relationship, I hope it is as well. So if I were to really jump back to American Jewish history, I would move to the period of slavery. And in the period of slavery, there was a Southern Jewish community. It was small. There were Jewish slave owners, but not more than the general population. There were anti-Semitic rumors at one point that Jews were heavily involved in the slave trade, not necessarily heavily involved more than any others. I would call that an anti-Semitic diatribe. But there were Jewish slave owners and Jewish traders, just like any Southerners. In fact, there's a famous story of a great Reform rabbi, David Einhorn, who spoke out against slavery in Baltimore, and the board chased him away. They fired him, and he had to go up and take a job in Philadelphia, of all places, my hometown. And so we do know of rabbis preaching against slavery and their congregations saying, no, what are you doing, Rabbi? This is our livelihood. Jews in the North, just like Northerners, were usually anti-slavery. But interestingly enough, there's a synagogue like B'nai Jeshurun, a very famous synagogue on the Upper West Side. Right before the Civil War, the rabbi there spoke out in a way that you could argue was pro-slavery, because he wanted to keep the Union from being divided. And so he said, let the Southerners do what they'd like. And in his case, the board actually kept him, although they did state publicly that they strongly disagreed with the rabbi's statement that he was that he was ready to compromise. But in the Civil War period, we have the Jewish community acting out at the populist level. In terms of leadership, most of them are anti-slavery, especially the rabbis, who are influenced by something that in the 1880s is called the Pittsburgh Platform, which defines early Reform Judaism as anti-ritual with a focus on universal ethics, and that Blacks should attain the same ethical standards as whites, and we're all held to the same ethical standard for all of humanity, no matter what the race is or religion. And they took a very anti-slavery position. It changes in the 1880s when most of our relatives came to America. And they were not Americanized to the same degree because they largely weren't educated like the German Jews. The German Jews moved to the South, they moved to the Midwest, they were highly educated, and they were Reform Jews. So if they were in the South, they may have taken a Southern position, but largely they were reformers who followed the Pittsburgh Platform. The Eastern Europeans, our relatives, for those of you who studied with me, our last film class, did not go to the South very quickly, or the West, unless they were watching The Frisco Kid and Gene Wilder is a story of an Eastern European Jew going out West and being out of place because they were Yiddish speakers. They were ethnic Jews, largely uneducated, and they weren't able to own land. They didn't know farming. They were city slickers, they were peddlers, and they were store owners, and they were often socialists as well. Being in the city, going in the Northeast by the millions, they were joined by many Blacks amidst the North migration. So many Blacks are coming from the South, many Jews are coming into the cities in a very populated space. And you can imagine them kind of fighting for turf. And many of the Jews owned small shops. And they had Black residents as customers and employees. And sometimes the proximity and the misunderstanding in language and custom led to great friction. So much so that James Baldwin, the Black novelist, ultimately writes about his experience in Harlem after World War I. He says, in Harlem, our landlords were Jews and we hated them. We hated them because they were terrible landlords and did not take care of the buildings. The grocery store owner was a Jew. The butcher was a Jew. And yes, we certainly paid more for bad cuts of meat than other New York citizens. And we very often carried insults home along with our meats. And the pawnbroker was a Jew. Perhaps we hated him most of all. So you can get a sense of friction. There's friction throughout the United States. Even the Leo Frank trial, many of you joined with me to see the musical Parade about the Leo Frank trial. That was about a Northern Jew in Atlanta getting framed for killing a young white girl. And Frank was the owner, or the one of the, not the owner, but the bookkeeper in the factory. And he's framed, and he's ultimately brought to jail because he's a Northern Jew. And even though the judge wants to release him, vigilantes come into the jail and they kidnap him and lynch him. The Jewish community at the time always thought Frank was innocent, and they went to the courts, but they blamed the janitor, who ultimately was found to be guilty of the crime, and the janitor was Black. And so even the Leo Frank trial, which led to the founding of the ADL against the KKK, led to a friction, unfortunately, between the Black and Jewish community of Atlanta. So you get that trial, you get friction in the cities, you get the writings of someone like Marcus Garvey, who was a Black, advocated for a Black independent state in Africa. We had Zionism, there's Marcus Garvey, and some of his writings include some anti-Jewish sentiment. And then to add on top of it all, if you're not depressed enough, there's another business that is new, and Jews need new business opportunities in America. Once again, it's tough to be a Jew. You can't own land, you can't get into certain universities, there's quotas, you can't get into some law firms. It's not like it is today, but there's a brand new business where there are no obstacles out west, and that's Hollywood. And so Jews gain prominence in Hollywood, and there is a continual, to this day, an argument that Hollywood projects poor stereotypes of Black individuals. And then we have Al Jolson in blackface. Even George Gershwin was accused of cultural appropriation for some of his music. So there are famous Jews in Hollywood, and the portrayals of Blacks in Hollywood, we know, is not fond early on. And right now we're kind of trying to go back and right those early wrongs. But you get all of these problems, and then things begin to change, thankfully. The American Jewish Committee, the American Jewish Congress, the ADL, all become central to the fight against racial prejudice. And they make significant contributions, along with individual Jews, to the NAACP, the Urban League, the Congress of Racial Equality, SNCC. By the civil rights period, 50% of the attorneys in the South were Jewish. And over 50% of the whites who went to Mississippi to challenge Jim Crow were Jewish. Now, the Jewish population is 2% of America, and we're over 50%. So like, what happens in the 60s? It's pretty extraordinary. And the movie does have some very powerful scenes, I think, about how the shift begins to occur. That shift, which is really the golden age, really begins in the 1940s with Brown versus Board of Education, when the NAACP comes forward. In that case, many of the briefs are filed by Jewish civil rights organizations, and Jews and Blacks start fighting the legal system together. They create the New York State college system, basically, to combat religious and racial discrimination in higher education. They make permanent the war's Fair Employment Practices Act, fighting employment discrimination. So Jews and Blacks have a lot in common, and they pass anti-Klan and anti-violence legislation. They're just, from the 40s to the 60s, I can go on and on about the relationship. In the movie, you may even see that some of the rabbis down south, the synagogues were threatened with violence for taking such a stand. And many of you read the temple bombing, the story of the synagogue in Atlanta that was bombed. And there's in the movie the story of Rabbi Rothschild, who is really an unbelievable person. His wife is still alive to this day. He was a Reform rabbi, and the bravery that they demonstrated is really quite extraordinary, and that his congregation supported him as well. But it wasn't true of everybody. For instance, in Selma, the Jewish community largely stayed quiet because they were so small and they were Holocaust survivors that the parents basically said to the kids, "We just survived the Holocaust. Don't stir things up. Just keep your heads down. We don't want you to really be seen." But a place like Atlanta, where there was a more sizable community with a leader, they were able to rise to the occasion. So ultimately, we have Heschel and King, and then things begin to fall apart. And with this,
Can I ask you a question? American Council of Christians and Jews, you mentioned ADL, you mentioned AJC. Because I always understood that they were very involved in some of these racial issues also.
yeah, I mean, I could go on and on with a large list of the organizations that work together in this kind of heyday. What I want to turn to, I want to invite Ed into the conversation, because when I spoke to Ed yesterday, he said to me, which Ed, I found really interesting, although, you know, once we went to breakout groups, you're no longer next to me. Oh, there you are, on page one. You said something really interesting to me, which was, you know, you didn't know this history necessarily, even though as a Jew, I was kind of raised in it. And you were surprised by the Jewish involvement. And for me, that hinted at, you know, how far removed we are from this golden age. And I started to ask you, and I was hoping you could share a little bit about, you know, why, as you looked at this movie and compared it to today, what are the significant differences between what you witnessed on film and perhaps these days?
Well, thank you. Perhaps, Rabbi, you should do your own documentary on the balanced view of Jewish blacks in America. Maybe that'll be next year's movie. You know, I think the first thing I thought of was, I said, every black activist, this should be like required viewing, because I was almost certain that they wouldn't have known the history either. And every now and then you'll see an activist that will have said something that turns out to be anti-Semitic. And I sort of attribute that to just ignorance, and they just don't know. And I think I almost say embarrassment, like, oh my God, I can't believe you like fell for that. But to repeat the point, I think for myself, you know, let's say maybe over a period of time, like I had heard a rumor that there was a Jewish attorney that had worked with Thurgood Marshall. And it wasn't until I saw the actual movie that I realized that it was not just a rumor, but that there was some truth to that and the role they played. And I think that when I was watching the movie, I wouldn't say that it wasn't just a black Jewish allies. They were like totally enmeshed. So I'd known that there might have been some Jews involved in the founding of the NAACP, but I didn't realize that there were Jews in the leadership of both Slick and SNCC. Like I had no idea that they were in leadership roles. And which prompted me to go back and look and finding out about the Jewish role in the founding of the Niagara movement, the founding of the NAACP. I'm looking at people like the Jewish relationship with W.B. Du Bois, the Jewish relationship with A. Philip Randolph. Jewish relationship with Paul Robeson, the Jewish relationship with Stokely Carmichael. So I'm like, oh my God, like they're connected like with every aspect of basically the civil rights movement in the last 100 years. And I think that it's almost as a shock that like they said, for 30 or 40 years, there hasn't been this connection. And so one of the things I wrote down in my notes, I said for someone like myself, I think of like we talk about the blacks and browns working together, meaning blacks and Hispanics or black and Latinx. I would have never thought of blacks and Jews working together because it's just not in my framework or repertoire or anything like that. So I wrote in my notes, I said, are Hispanics, Latinx the new Jews? Like that's who we are partnering with now because we find ourselves in similar situations. I think one of the things that jumped out at me is sometimes you'll hear people say, we don't need allies, we need accomplices. Like an ally will pay the bail, the accomplice is in jail with you. And so in the movie, we have the Jews who are saying, we are proud to be in jail with you. And I was like, oh my God, like this is just how deep this relationship was. Like they were literally side by side in the jail cell. And so it was things like that that jumped out to me. And I would make one last comment, and that was when King writes his letter to the Birmingham jail and he asks for more sheets of paper, and he also says to tell the northern rabbis to come down there, we need them. And I thought it was interesting that as an SOS, he wasn't able to call on the Christian community because they were the ones that were supporting him being there in the first place, that he had to reach out to the Jewish community to sort of come to the rescue. And so again, that was something that jumped out at me.
Yeah, really interesting. So certainly, it's the Jewish community from the north really poured into the South in tremendous numbers, as I mentioned, 50%. And we saw Goodman and Cheney in the movie and Schwerner. It's really quite extraordinary. I want to kind of fast forward now to like what happens, which I hate to be the one that kind of is the breaker of the bad news, but I think it's important to understand, to process together if we're going to kind of reclaim the golden age, God willing. So from what I understand, and I did speak to Ed with this last night just about King and Heschel, because one of us thought perhaps the death of charismatic leadership really made a substantial difference, losing both of those leaders. But there are a number of issues that come up through the 60s. And one is the Black Power movement begins to assert that it's more important to have Black leaders filling these positions and fewer Jewish leaders. That Jewish leadership either became patronizing or ultimately stunted the growth of upcoming local Black leaders. So much so that the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in 1966 voted to exclude whites from its leadership, which resulted in the expulsion of several Jewish leaders. And this is not a judgment on my call. I'm just trying to understand perhaps where the organizational support fell apart. Then in 1967, an academic named Harold Cruz wrote a book, The Crisis of the Negro Intellectual. He argued that Jews had become a problem for Blacks precisely because they had so identified with the Black struggle, and insisted that the Jewish involvement could impede the emergence, and I quote, of Afro-American ethnic consciousness. And so there's a sense that Black should be controlling Black organizations. Soon things shift in the community as well. There's a Pan-African nationalism and anti-colonialism, and Israel becomes a sticking point in the debate, especially around the Six-Day War is happening. And American Jews become more Zionist, and the left becomes more anti-Zionist. and we see Israel beginning to split the movement. And then while I was studying as an undergrad and at Penn, I was studying Black Jewish relations, actually, with a number of professors, because a lot of things were happening in the 80s that continued to divide the communities. I don't know if you remember Jesse Jackson calling New York Hymietown, and there were riots in Brooklyn, and Louis Farrakhan was probably gaining more power than he deserved. And a number of incidents were occurring. And Jews, for the first time, started to leave liberalism in large numbers, and many prominent neoconservatives are Jewish to this day, actually. And you see a splintering of the communities. So much so that in a 1998 survey I noticed, anti-Semitism in the Black community was 4 times the amount as in the white community, according to this poll. And I would say that racism in the Jewish community existed. And I think if we looked closely at our lives and our backgrounds, we would witness anti-Semitism in our own communities. I mean, I know that I did grow up with Yiddish terms for Black people that I will not say and I'm not proud of, but it did pervade the Jewish community. And so that's to say that, we have work to do. And I would like to argue that this is our moment to do this work and own these truths and try to reclaim some of the partnerships that existed, what I'm going to call the 40s, and they do make the Holocaust story prominent in the movie, to the 60s, and maybe the passing of King. But with that, I want to really open it to the group before we go back into breakouts. Any thoughts?
Rabbi, let me just say one last thing.
Yes, always.
So everybody here, I'm sure, remembers the whole Unite the Right and the event in Charlottesville. And again, this is just like the mirror image in terms of that break in that connection from the Black Jewish side. So for me, I didn't have any real appreciation why that was significant. And so what I tell people more sort of and embarrassingly so is I didn't really know why we were marching or what we were marching for or what the purpose of this was. And I just said to myself, it's a sunny day. I don't have anything else scheduled. Okay, I'll march today because I don't want to say that I wasn't there. But if I had understood the Black-Jewish relationship as you've talked about it, or as I learned from the movie, then I would have said, oh my God, like this is important. Like I have to be there. I must be there. I have to do this because I would have understood that reciprocal relationship that had gone on for a century. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I want to encourage, most people know Ed from our services and his steady presence in a lot of our initiatives. We're so grateful that he's a member of our community. But if you're new to our community, I just want to introduce Ed. He just wrote an article on the Times of Israel that I recommend to everybody. It's really an important article to read. So thank you, Ed. I want to open it up. Any thoughts, comments?
Yes,
Shelly Buckler.
I've had a comment, yes. I think you're right. I think the time is right for another golden age. And the golden age isn't going to be accomplished by Jews taking a leadership role. It's going to be accomplished to that which makes huge progress for Blacks. And 70% of all Blacks want charter schools, or they want free access to send their kids where they want. And it's been demonstrated that there is a culturally Black inner city teaching methods that produce fantastic results. I could go on and on about that. And there's a recent book by Thomas Sowell that on charter schools that explains that. And so if Jews want to do something in the golden age to help Blacks, help and form a movement among us to open up charter schools. Now, who voted against charter schools when we had them an opportunity here in Massachusetts to increase that, when Governor Baker requested it and it was voted down by big votes, all coming from the suburbs involving a lot of Jewish residents. And why? Because the advertising said it's going to take money from the public schools and their precious kids are then going to lose out in favor of that. And that's not true. But what I'm saying is we ought to do something that Blacks really want and need to make progress. And if we get behind that and lead that, and then I think we can create another golden age, and they can see Jews in the present in another way than they have.
Thank you. So let's take more. People don't need to react to people's suggestions, charter schools, pro, con, but I want to open it more widely as well. Jerry.
Okay. I want to just take a little different perspective. I'm certainly old enough to have lived through everything in the movie, and I've read about it. I've seen it on TV. I've seen documentaries, but nothing made more sense to me than when we went on the civil rights trip and we walked in those places and we heard firsthand from people who actually lived in that time frame. So I would really encourage us, if this pandemic is ever over, to make sure that we put this civil rights trip right back in the forefront, so that as many of our congregants and young people, and we have to see if we can get our teenagers to go, because I think that made such an impact on me and our fellow travelers. And I see some of the heads nodding of our fellow travelers who, when we walked over the bridge, the Pettus Bridge, it was simply breathtaking, and listening firsthand to the stories.
Yeah, I would agree. And what Brian Stevenson has done is absolutely incredible. A true mitzvah hero.
Jerry, I don't know if you remember, it's a number of years ago when John Doria was at the middle school. Ted Bloom and a few other people in the community worked with John, and we raised money. And a bunch of middle school students went down and basically did the same trip that the temple did, and dialogued with some of the students down there and learned. And then some of the students came back up here, and then the administration changed down in the Birmingham area. But I think those are the types of things we could explore also.
So to continue building relationships and traveling to witness history. Other thoughts about the movie or the topic?
Yeah, it's Alan Mitchell. You know, I think that the suggestions being made will certainly could have resonance, and on a racial justice first principle, the Jewish community certainly needs to reinvigorate its efforts. That doesn't mean that we're going to develop that kind of partnership with the Black community, because in the golden age, there was shared trauma. I don't think the Black community any longer sees the Jews as a highly vulnerable group. Of course, there's anti-Semitic actions, but they're not of the kind that the Black community experiences on a daily basis, whether it's with the police or the justice system or employment. So I think it's a tough nut, Joel, and I appreciate your position of not romanticizing or glorifying it. I think, we do the right thing because it's the right thing. It may not reestablish that collaborative closeness that was there in the 60s and early 70s.
We like tough nuts, though. Anyone else?
It's Deb Goldstein. Just an observation recently on this subject. The Wellesley alumni have set up a Wellesley Racial Justice Initiative, which is having conversations among alumni on this issue and trying to create awareness and connections and whatever. And I've been to several conversations and meetings, and I have been struck that at the ones that I have gone to anyway, there is a predominance of Jewish participation in the groups. And I think that kind of speaks to our innate feeling that, of pursuing justice and wanting to do this. So, I think there is that inspiration is still there. We have to be able to harness it somehow.
Thank you. Karen?
I do think that it's a hard and a difficult subject, but I think also just wanted to add it to the conversation. I think the issue about the relationship between Jews and Palestinians is also an issue that gets brought up in the Black community.
Yes, the intersectionality we haven't addressed, which is much more common, but it really starts in the early 70s. And then it comes up in the movie with the Black Lives Matter movement. We actually have a speaker next week, Jeremy Burton of the JCRC, to help us make sense of the Jewish community's relationship with the various organizations and the Black Lives Matter movement. But it is true that many of our kids, when they go to college campus, and they might go to a rally to support women's issues, suddenly see signs that are anti-Israel. And it's really challenging for the Jewish community at this time. Other thoughts?
Joel?
Yeah.
One of the things that I don't think has been talked about very much is, I forget the term, this very American ideology that gets professed that with hard work, you can achieve anything.
Meritocracy.
Thank you. Thank you. And I think one of the things that happened in the breakdown, if you will, of that bond is that as time went on and you had all this extraordinary participation by some of the Jewish community because it was the right thing to do, eventually, I think there was this feeling, look, you guys who believe in meritocracy have been able to achieve that. Yeah. Meritocracy means nothing to us because no matter how hard we work and how well we do, the doors are slammed in our face. I don't know what the answer to that is, but it certainly is an expression that's very, I think, pervasive.
Yeah, thanks for raising that. I forgot to mention that. I mean, leaving the present day as a historian, one could say that in the 70s, another divisive area was affirmative action. Some of the more prominent cases had Jews advocating against affirmative action in university settings because Jews were being restricted from elite universities. There were quotas in the Ivy Leagues in the 60s that were quite well known, that Jews, they tried to keep the Jewish population down. And so the Jews went to meritocracy completely. You know, if we get the good scores, we should get in. And it led to being divided on affirmative action in a crazy kind of way. So that's an important point.
Mm-hmm. Hi, this is Judy Bernstein. I was going to say that I think the timing of all of that depended so much on the place that we were as a people in the 40s and 50s and 60s. That determined the way we saw things. And now I don't think the Jewish community as a whole sees things in the same way. At the time, in those earlier years, Jews were very hard put to do a lot of things they wanted to do. They couldn't be doctors in hospitals. They couldn't be lawyers in firms. There's so many things they couldn't do. But that changed for Jews. And I think when it changed, early on, they could see the issues for people of color. But later on, those things have largely dissolved from our lives. And that makes you view the world in a different way. You just don't have quite that same connection.
Yeah. So let's do this, everyone. First of all, I want to thank you for coming. This was an important movie at a unique moment in history, I believe. But I watched the movie with a certain amount of pride and a certain amount of sadness. A great pride about the Jewish role in the civil rights struggle, and great sadness with how much work still needs to be done. And so I just want to thank Ed for being on the call today. Ed's going to speak at the live gathering, as Judy had mentioned earlier. So hopefully we can tune into that through the Jewish Film Festival. And Ed, I don't know if you want to say anything, but I know you get embarrassed, but so I'll say it. Ed's doing some extraordinary work professionally in the Grove Hall area, really helping improve the lives of a lot of people. And I'm just grateful for the partnerships he's created with several members of our community. And I want to give the opportunity for Sherry or Edith and the RJI or Ed to share anything upcoming, because I really think it's important that this becomes central to Jewish life in the same way that it was for Abraham Joshua Heschel, so many rabbis and so many synagogue communities throughout the 60s who took great risks to help lead America to a better day. And I think what we know is the Temple of Beth Elohim has that possibility to do the same. So final thoughts from our chairs or people who are involved.
Rabbi, excuse me. Hi, my question is the rabbis, not your union, but the union, like, is there a position nationally among Reform rabbis of how to tackle this or how to possibly go back to that time of great activism? Because, I mean, like, what do rabbis now, what is the call for rabbis now, Reform rabbis?
You ask a complicated question with a few minutes left.
Sorry.
No, I should say there's no easy answer. I mean, even, I don't want to get things messy, but Dr. Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail, which is a worthy read, was in response to a collection of ministers. Actually, one rabbi signed that letter, which tells us it was the Clergy Association in Selma was telling King to maybe stay away. And the reason they did it is they kind of resented Northerners coming in and messing up their stuff. And King, who was sitting in jail, said, wait a minute, guys, I know I'm not from Selma, but this is what needs to take place. I say a rabbi signed that letter because I'm not that proud of that rabbi, but he really believed that a quieter approach was the right one at the time. I think history now says that he was wrong, and King's letter was one of the most transformational documents that we can read today, which is to say that it's really complicated, and different rabbis, take different approaches. I think the most important thing is that we all recognize the problem, and I'm not even sure we're there. And so the conversation is so significant that this should have primacy in our world today. So I hope that answers it. There are statements, but most importantly, there are a lot of different approaches. I'm the most proud, I say this truly, with our Temple Beth Elohim RJI initiatives. I think that what is taking place here is more significant than almost any place I know. And I know that it's only the beginning of the ball rolling downhill. So I really hope we can use this moment and this movie as a time for inspiration and chizuk, in Hebrew, a strengthening of our initiatives. So with that, Philip, Sherry, Ed, anything we can kind of move the ball forward on? A charge? Edith? Sherry,
Sherry's actually,
right.
Sherry and I were just chatting. She's gonna jump in when she. But Jerry Slavich just asked, what is RJI? That is our Racial Justice Initiative.
Just last year, actually, we had these wonderful civil rights journeys. It's just been a year, and Edith and I were thinking about what has been accomplished since that wonderful year. And the election that we just had is a symbol of that, and not totally with who was elected, because we are so darn partisan at Racial Justice Initiative, but how many votes we were able to make happen. Because you will remember that not only did we visit civil rights places of interest, but we also visited Fair Fight. Gloria, you'll remember that you were there with me. And then Stacey Abrams came to our own temple. So we engendered a great interest in postcard writing and telephoning and texting. And I think we can be very proud of the voter output that we achieved in this election. When you see those numbers out of Georgia, Temple Beth Elohim can give out a hallelujah. We're responsible for many of those votes.
And it's not over. And it's not over.
And it's not
for
over.
The Senate race.
Yes, and you'll be hearing from us. You'll be hearing from us. The very next meeting of the Racial Justice Initiative is going to be a particularly interesting one. What the racial wealth gap looks like today and what you can do about it. And we have a very interesting panel that will be with us. And December 7th, 7 o'clock, I think you'll read all about it in the upcoming bulletin. This is where real partnership can take place. And I think you should put it on your calendar now. And while you're doing that, you can pick up the book Cast by Isabel Wilkerson. We don't have a date for our community book read of this fantastic book, but it will happen. And this is another opportunity for us to get together and learn about these differences that keep us apart in ways that they shouldn't. Philip, anything I'm missing?
Can you repeat the name of the book, please?
Cast, C-A-S-T-E, Cast.
Joel, can I just jump in for just a second? You know, none of this happens without great leadership, and you're very modest about that. But I want to just say thank you for your leadership in supporting all of this, because what it really does, it enables these programs. So thank you. And you were muted.
I was about to mute you, and I couldn't find you. So, not thank you.
I muted myself.
I just want to share. So Jeremy Burton next Thursday, the 19th, will be speaking at 7 o'clock. Jeremy is the head of the JCRC and has really led a lot of the Jewish initiatives in this area. I hope you can join us. Any final thoughts? Ed, I thank you. We look forward to seeing you on the Zoom call next week. Next week, we meet. I am going to email you in the next 24 hours. If you are not registered, if you can email me, and I'll make sure you're registered so you get the next film, which we'll discuss next Monday. I look forward to seeing you then. Look for Ed's article in the Times of Israel. And thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Bye.